हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय चैनल। आज हम करेंगे स्पेंसर्स पोइट्री 2 पार्ट 2। ओके, नाउ इंट्रोडक्शन हम पढ़ेंगे। इन द प्रीवियस यूनिट वी एग्जामिन्ड स्पेंसर्स शॉर्टर वर्क as indexing a new style of poetry, particularly with respect to the tradition of courtly love. In this unit, we will continue that exploration of his poetry, but focusing instead on two of his longer works, namely Spenser's two major nuptial songs. The nuptial होता है related to marriage, the epithalamion and the prothalamion. Both the wedding poems deal with the celebration of marriage, but with significant and far-reaching differences in treatment, style, and intent. As with the shorter poems in the previous unit, therefore, the analysis will therefore focus on the formal elements of the poems. The epithalamion is a form of poetry dating back to classical Greek literature and was probably first used as a literary form by the Greek poetess Sappho. Sappho. The term literally means at the bridal chamber and earlier referred to the song sung in celebration of the bride's wedding night, literally at her bridal chamber. Prothalamion is a term invented by Spenser in order to differentiate his poem by that name from his own and earlier written bridal song. But the meaning remains essentially unchanged, with the prefix pro standing in for epi. Pro means prior to and epi means outside of. Conventionally, an epithalamion described the wedding day itself and the events leading up to it, and also celebrated the sexual union of the married couple. In this sense, it was usually also an erotic poem or song. While Spenser's own epithalamion carries elements of this eroticism, the prothalamion is a qualitatively different poem, almost completely devoid of eroticism, and in fact actually little more than a thinly disguised complaint poem. Now we will study epithalamion. The epithalamion is a carefully crafted yet exuberant, means large, song celebrating the poet's love for and marriage to Elizabeth Boyle. It appears to have been written as the culmination to the courtship described and embodied in the Amority sonnets. Like the Amority sonnets, it too celebrates a legitimate form of sexual desire that between bride and groom, husband and wife. According to the envoy, according to the message at the end of the poem, for example, the brief stanza 24, it is intended to be an ornament in lieu means badle mein, of many ornaments, and an endless monument to the beloved herself. It therefore carries multiple functions as celebration of the wedding, as celebration of the beloved, as celebration of legitimate passion, as ornament to the beloved, and as monument to her. In this, it matches the multiple roles that Spenser gives himself in the poem as poet lover, bridegroom, master of ceremonies of the wedding, and as eventual husband. Spenser envisages means imagines the poet's function not separately but as extensions of each other, and to this extent they reinforce each other. In comparison to the prothalamion, Spenser's other wedding song, the integration of the multiple functions of the poem is therefore more successful in the epithalamion. Even the curtailed last stanza of the poem doesn't detract from this sense of an integral whole. Indeed, it may be seen as specific to maintaining the sense of wholeness of the poem. The poem is in 24 stanzas representing the hours of the day, with a total of 365 long lines of 5 feet or more in prosodic terms, uh, representing the days of the year. In this sense, the apparent curtailment of the poem with the envoy is so coincidence or hasty accident as the poet would have us believe, but a deliberate effect. It serves to simultaneously accentuate the senses of immediacy and of a longer duration, as if the one gives rise to the other. At the same time, the poem draws toward together the universal and the temporal. Temporal means non spiritual. The idea of a love that is divine and transcendental with a more earthly, sensual love. Following the consistent Spenserian strategy of reconciling the Platonic and the Christian perspectives, the poem seeks to celebrate the eternal in the temporal, the divine in the mortal. In other words, Spenser's conception of love is firmly located in time, even as it is proffered. Proffered means presented as lasting and undermined by time. The elements of time or temporality is therefore central to the crafting of the poem, not just in its formal aspects, but at the level of the theme of love and its treatment as well. Now, an essential aspect of this temporal element is the refrain of the stanza, which was which are variations on the last line of the first stanza, जिसमें बोला गया है, the woods shall to me answer and my echo ring. Through the refrain and its variations, the poet manages to suggest continuity as well as change, a suggestion that is born out in the very images that are repeated of the wood and the echo. For means because woods undergo a long term set of changes that belie the sense of permanence that is associated with them, just as an echo bears the promise to prolong a sound but must inevitably die too. Further, the refrain itself changes qualitatively from stanza 17 onward when it becomes negative. The woods no more shall answer, nor your echo ring. The allocation of 16 stanzas with a positive refrain and 8 with a negative one is again not coincidental, but matches the number of hours of daylight and dark, respectively. The sense of balance that is achieved is reinforced by the offsetting. Offsetting means balance of the celebratory tone in the poem, with passages of deep anxiety and worry in stanza 18 and 19. The poem begins with a traditional invocation to the Muses. The Muses are then invited to participate in the wedding as bridesmaids, along with the fairy hours and the three graces, or the handmaid of the Cyprian queen. The pastoral setting of the poem is made clear in stanza 5, partially in adherence to poetic convention and partially to permit the orgiastic celebrations that take place after the wedding, stanza 14 and 15. Further, this setting permits the dramatic dimension of the poem to be enacted more vividly than if the poem had been a simply descriptive one. The poem itself has approximately 5 movements in terms of dramatic action. The first is from stanza 1 to stanza 8, which set out the Poem's purpose, its means of accomplishing it, and the phrase pastoral setting of the event. The second is from stanza 9 to stanza 13, which eulogize means praise his beloved's beauty as she wakes up, is adorned, and then enters the temple or church for the wedding and the wedding itself. The third is from stanza 14 to stanza 17, which are about the celebrations after the wedding and the poet bridegroom's impatience to be alone with his bride. The fifth is from stanza 18 to 24, which express the poet bridegroom's fears and anxieties and then seek the blessings of all the gods for the union. These five moments culminate in the envoy of the last stanza and are explicated by it. Despite the evident uh, eulogizing of the beloved means praise of the beloved in and through these moments, however, what must be noted about the poem is that, like the Amorati sonnets before it, the poet's conception of his beloved remains external and curious. While she is celebrated in all her beauty, both physical and spiritual, she remains absent as a person with a degree of autonomy and agency. Stanza 10 and 11 in particular objectify her so completely that we may picture her, but we find it difficult to apprehend her as a person. This sense of objectification is intensified by the fragmenting of the body of the bride into its attractive and seductive parts. कैसे ये बताया गया है? Her goodly eyes like sapphires shining bright, her forehead yori white, her cheeks like apple which the sun hath ruded, her lips like cherries charming men to bite, her breast like a bowl of cream when uncruded, her paps like lilies budded, her snowy neck like to a marble tower, all her body like a palace fair, ascending up with many a stately stire to honor, seat, and chastity's sweet bower. The analogy of the means contradiction बोल सकते हैं comparison of the palace is extended in the next stanza to praise his beloved's virtue. There dwells sweet love and constant chastity, unspotted faith and comely comely womanhood, regard of honor and mild modesty. Their virtue reigns as queen in a royal throne, and Goth laws alone, the which the base affections do obey, and yield their uh, s- services into her will. Nay, thought of thing uncomely ever may dare to approach to tempt her माइंड टू इल. ये ना थोड़ा पढ़ने में मुश्किल होता है क्योंकि हमने ये पढ़ा था ना पीछे कि वी और यू जो है वो एक एक्सचेंज रहते हैं. जहाँ वी यूज़ होता है वहाँ पे यूज़ होता है और जहाँ यू यूज़ होना है वहाँ वी यूज़ होता है. These are praised as being superior to the physical beauty described in the previous stanza, and the analogy is a typically feudal one, employing metaphors of the virtues as a queen unto whose service the base affections or sensual desires are turned. Again, as we saw with the Amorati sonnets, the poet's attempt is to reconcile two opposite conceptions of love, the spiritual and the physical. The latter, the physical being offered as a path to the former, rather than as something to be either overwhelmed by or to be rejected. But in order to serve the demands of this reformist Protestant morality, by which a legitimate desire may be inscribed into the poem, the poet has to render his own beloved almost sexless or lacking in desire herself. Given that the poem is a celebration of the wedding and of the nuptial union, such as erasure of feminine desire suggests that the poet doesn't see his beloved as a subjective individual with her own feelings and emotions that would be different from his own or even from his perception of them, but as an object desirable and to be acquired. It is then again no coincidence that the social setting invoked in the poem is not the princess and the nobility, but commerce and trade, as implied by the invocation of the merchant's daughters in the first line of stanza 10. This is sense, this in sense is furthered when we call phrases like usury of long delight. स्टेंजा 2 में है usury of long delight being used in regard to the relationship implying a contractual arrangement that is not confined to an emotional and spiritual attachment or commitment but is underwritten by money. Now, Epithalamion is nevertheless a poem that is unique in the poetry of the 16th century, not least because it is probably the first English wedding poem to announce itself explicitly as one. In its poetic craft, it offers a rich tapestry of sensual imagery that borrows as much from classical legends and myths as from Christian ideas and beliefs and local folklore. Now, थोड़ा ब्रैकेट में दिया है फॉर इंस्टांस द डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ द फेयर्स ऑफ द नाइट एज हॉन्टेड बाय गॉब्लिन्स spirits etc in stanza 19. It is this fusion that it achieves of diverse poetic traditions and of almost oppositional religious beliefs in terms of invoking pagan gods and yet retaining a strongly reformist Christian sensibility that is in many ways unprecedented on this scale in English literature. Spenser was to go on to expand the scale many times over in The Fairy Queen, but somewhat unsuccessfully. This poem may then be considered his most successful fusion of these diverse poetic traditions and styles. चलो फ्रेंड्स, हमने ना ये एपिथेलियमियन ख़त्म कर लिया. अब हम प्रोथेलियमियन करेंगे नेक्स्ट वीडियो में. थैंक यू सो मच.